Today we're going to be checking out Homeworld Remastered Collection Review by MandaloreGaming, as suggested by a ton of you guys actually, under our Mandalore Reactions. Now, personally, I don't know anything about the Homeworld series, never heard about it before, but it's very clearly sci-fi, and I love sci-fi. So maybe this will be up my alley? I don't know. It might end up on my list of games to try out and play, like 4 years from now, considering the current backlog that we have. But from what you guys say, I've heard good things about it. Except for the third one, which we'll likely get to later on in this series. Oh, and also my current plans for Mandalore Reactions. I'll likely finish the Homeworld series here, and then move on to the next big one that you guys have been suggesting, which was the Thief series. Don't know anything about that one either, but pretty excited to learn more about it. If you have any other suggestions, please feel free to let me know in the comments. But of course, before we get into the video, as always, make sure to go support Mandalore. Link to the OG video is at the very top of the description. As per usual, I'll be pausing a lot and commenting on a ton of stuff, so it's not going to be the best way to watch the video. Just go and watch it on Mandalore's channel if you want to see it that way. But alright my dudes, without further ado, let's get right into it. Hi?
This is the Garden of Kadesh. For 13 generations we have protected it from the unclean. The tyrannic raiders who came before you refused to join and were punished for this trespass. Like theirs, your ship has already defiled this holy place. If you have come to join, we welcome you, and will spare you your ship until all have disembarked. If you have come to consume the garden, you will be removed at once. What are your intentions?
I'm just passing by?
We were unaware of the significance of this location. We mean no conflict. Please allow us time to prepare our engines so that we may withdraw as requested.
If you will not join, then die.
Oh shit.
No withdrawal from the garden.
Enemy contact. Group 9 under attack.
Acknowledged.
What is this? What is going on?
Remember, there are many space games out there, but only one has the Gardens of Kadesh.
Is this like an RTS game?
Even with the genre not as popular as it once was, there are still plenty of space RTS
This is Battlefleet Gothic Armada, yeah? Another game on the list.
games. However, most of these control on a flat plane, just like any other RTS. So instead of all of that, what if you wanted the full 3D space experience? Outer space is a magical realm where you can travel in any direction and be killed by materials you've never heard of before. Controlling units on a flat plane doesn't quite give that experience. If you do want that, you have Homeworld, and Homeworld 2, and Homeworld Cataclysm. Then Nexus the Jupiter incident, but those last two are stories for another day. There are some other little ones out there.
Are they connected to the same universe? Just under a different name, I'm assuming? Maybe like a spin-off. So that's interesting. How would this control exactly? An RTS in a 3D space? I'm very new to RTS games, so I have no idea.
But the point is, there's not a whole lot. And if you wanted this kind of game, Homeworld is where most people point you. It's an ambitious, groundbreaking game from 1999.
Delta formation confirmed.
Some stuff from then you could pick up and play just fine. Homeworld has a barrier to it. It's still a great game, but interface issues are especially clunky to play nowadays. So in 2015, Gearbox, with the help of some original Relic developers, released the Remastered collection. It has reworked versions.
Wait, did you say Relic developers? Why was Relic making all of the like OG RTS games back in the past? Am I bugging? I'm pretty sure they made Dawn of War as well, right? We just recently finished that here on the channel, and it was amazing.
Versions of 1 and 2, and the original versions are still in.
Why? Why do we have that as the background? Mandalore, please don't remind me of Anonymous Agony. I don't want to remember that video. I had such a hard time trying to get that uploaded onto YouTube without getting flagged. Jesus.
Included. This looks like a great deal, but there were and still are some issues. So let's get into that. Compared to the original, the freshly launched remaster looked amazing. It looked more like a remake than a remaster, which wasn't too far from the truth. The main problem was that some systems were broken, particularly in Homeworld 1. The remaster for both was based off of the Homeworld 2 engine, which does make sense considering the level the first game was at, but how both engines handle or even can comprehend different situations is incredibly different. For example, in Homeworld every ship is built and controlled individually. You can still group them up and put them into formations, including custom formations. How you use these can give you a huge edge in battle. You could use a frigate line to spread out firepower and screen for larger ships, move craft into a defensive sphere or a risky attack one, then combine that with tactics, which goes with your standard RTS stance system, trade speed.
This seems so incredibly complex. But also just the use of the second game to simulate the first game kind of reminds me of the Myth series. I believe in Mandalore's review of the game, he also said that like it's usually recommended to just play the first one using the second game's physics. So I guess that was just commonplace back in the day.
For more damage or vice versa. So with both of those, you have a lot to play around with. Ships will try to hold their formation in combat, and their speed, shape, and aggressiveness will contribute to your success. If you wanted true 3D space combat, this is the kind of shit you live for. This also means problems creep in when you use Homeworld 2's engine, in that fighters, corvettes, and other small craft are automatically built as squads. The only things built individually now are larger and special use ships. Formations are super simplified and now tied to their stance. Setting interceptors to aggressive automatically makes them a claw and stuff like that. This was done to make micromanaging easier, which is a later conversation. But for now, we have an engine that does not comprehend individual ships and formations existing together as a thing, now running a game all about using individual ships and putting them in formations. To put it simply, it didn't work. Formations broke apart the instant contact was made with the enemy. It would be a year and a half until the old system was brought back, but it would be across both games, which was fantastic news. Except it wasn't all quite there. This month would also be the last time the game got a patch, with a preview build for one that never came out being the last at the time of this video. Formations were implemented but still had some significant bugs. The most notorious one being a formation of fighters would only have one ship firing. Meanwhile, the other ships are trying to pick their own targets and end up not firing at all. How does this happen?
Great.
Well, let's go back in time. When I made the video on AVP Extinction, I asked for anyone involved with it to tell me more about it. One of them
have not seen this review at all, and didn't know Alien vs Predator had a video game. Probably because it wasn't all that good. I don't know. Just assuming, because for the most part, like, these games based on movies usually don't pan out very well.
Them was a developer who did graphics work and programming on it. He had some fun tidbits on how small the team was and how messy development got. When I say that some games sound like they had people grabbed out of the office to do voice acting, I'm not joking about that. It happened here. They had grabbed the guy who did the unit artwork.
Oh my god!
He also had horror.
Actually, there are plenty of games that Mandalore has reviewed where it's just kind of been like that as well. Once again, the Myth games. It's just the developers themselves voicing some characters here and there. But hey, when you're working on a budget, that's all you can get.
Horrifying knowledge in that the game does have a PC version, but it wasn't part of the contract and never shipped. Anyways, this was his first ever work on an RTS game, and he's stuck in the industry. He did a significant amount of work on the Homeworld remaster and was able to answer a lot of questions. So here's some stuff I learned. It was never going to be viable to do a one-to-one remaster of both games. Think of it more like you could play Homeworld 1's campaign with 2's rules. What happened was that a lot of people went above and beyond. Again, they were doing a remaster and not a remake. The original plan was to touch up the visuals, but an engine that old had its own issues and things weren't looking quite as nice as they could be. So he convinced them to use a new solution, which was him rebuilding the graphics engine from scratch. He thought of some madman additions for the time, like what if beam weapons cast light? Then they did. This is just an example from one person. A lot of quality of life features and UI updates just weren't on the map at all. People were having to wear a lot of hats. A lot of the art staff especially was having to step up in unusual ways. After all, the original plan was let's port Homeworld 1 into the new system. It's a visual update. Why have any design staff? Things become even more complicated here. When it comes to combat, the games simulate a lot and don't cheat. To quote him, bullets leave a gun, fly, and hit shit. They do damage. That's it. He compares it to the difference between an arcade driving game and a driving simulation. If it's arcade rules, you can tweak numbers around to whatever. When things aren't all linked together so tightly, you have some wiggle room. When they are, things are much more difficult. Homeworld balance is affected by how a ship behaves, and the physical shape of a spaceship. And this was being done by developers not specialized in it with the help of player volunteers.
That sounds so incredibly complicated to program and make sure that it's working properly. Like, Jesus. Because, yeah, it's not about the numbers anymore. It's actually about how everything controls and interacts with everything else. I mean, just look at Total War Warhammer 3. Like, after all these years, after release, there's still some bugs here and there that kind of break the game. It's just the nature of these more ambitious games, I suppose.
Formations working at a baseline took months of effort. How the engine handled formations and just the concept of flight had to be rebuilt. Huge parts of the game had to be retooled, and all for what was supposed to be a simpler Homeworld HD. Why the patches suddenly stopped, I have no clue and can only speculate on. Could be financial reasons, could be moving people to Homeworld 3. I have no clue, but it certainly wasn't a lack of passion from those working on it. The good news is that you can get rid of the critical remaining bugs. Enter the Players Patch. This was developed by a lot of those
Nice.
volunteers I mentioned earlier. This squashes a ton of bugs, rebalances some things to be smoother, and adds a whole bunch of new game options. It's on Steam Workshop, it's on ModDB if you use GOG. It's well worth getting, and I'll later explain some other options it adds in. So now that you're a little more caught up with the remaster situation, let's talk about Homeworld.
Okay, what is Homeworld?
On the distant planet of Carrick, clans waged endless war on each other. Carrick is a horrible desert wasteland. It's sort of similar to Dune's Arrakis, but there are no sandworms here. There's also no spice or anything of value, so Baron Harkonnen doesn't want it either.
Okay, dude. Like, with how much I enjoy sci-fi, I really need to just learn about Dune. I don't know anything about that universe, but there's just so many references back to it.
What are you doing here instead of being in the desert, heading them off?
They'd explore these desert wars more in a prequel game, but again, that's a story for another day. What's important is that the conflicts come to a close when a fantastic discovery is made. The wreckage of an ancient, massive starship is found. Even more startling is what they find aboard the ship.
Deep inside the ruin was a single stone that would change the course of our history forever.
A star
On the
map?
stone was etched a galactic map, and a single word more ancient than the clans themselves.
Homeworld.
Higara,
Higara?
our home.
Okay. Oh, dude, yeah. Just
The story
different
continues a
language.
century later. The discovery of the ship and the Guidestone has united all the clans, and all the Kushan people have been busy. They've been preparing for unknown threats from space, and through reverse engineering they've developed formidable power. Their greatest project involves a massive colony ship they've been developing for 60 years. A neuroscientist named Karen Sajet has entombed herself inside of the mothership to act as its organic computer and fleet command. The campaign begins with the mothership's first proper test run. It's an enormous spaceship, and the testing doubles as the tutorial. Harvesters can collect asteroids, or gas, which can be taken aboard for processing. From there, it can
Okay.
construct smaller spacecraft. So the thing is capable of pumping out a fleet wherever it goes. It has facilities for studying salvage and researching new technologies. With other space-traveling life out there, the Kushan will need to be able to adapt. However, the most important test being conducted is for the hyperdrive. A non-FTL ship has been slow-boating to the edge of the solar system for the past decade. It's just an easy matter of jumping over to them without exploding. This is some old technology they're tapping into. I like that Karen sounds genuinely surprised that they didn't all blow up, or become part of a Space Hulk.
We made it. Hyperspace jump complete. All systems nominal, and the quantum wave effect has dissipated.
We have misjumped. The support ship is not here. Fleet Command will signal the car Salim while we confirm our current position.
So it is a missed jump, but not too far. Probing the area.
I mean, just the fact that you guys didn't all die is probably a miracle in and of itself. We're using technology that we don't fully understand here, right? This was all kind of reverse engineered, so yeah. But okay, I mean, we already see the basic RTS skeleton here, with just collecting resources, researching new technology, possibly unlocking better units, and then using those units to battle whatever you run into. I wonder if this is one of those games that just has like a deep amount of lore for the alien species, or maybe this is just more like BattleTech, where there's a bunch of different human colonies out there instead, with no real talk about aliens.
Reveals that the support vessel is nearby and ready to assist in the... Oh, okay, it's trashed and up on blocks. And the aliens who did it are still around.
Never mind. There you go. Aliens. What the? They're running into each other?
The hostile aliens gear up to attack and they're terrible at it. Their codename Kids Next Door spaceships are vastly inferior. Even unarmed salvage ships can easily yoink their corvettes away. So they have some enhanced interrogation to look forward to. I mean, they basically blew up a food truck. They had no chance in an actual fight. So aliens are around, the mothership will need to go back to be retrofitted.
Oh. Ooh.
No one's left.
This music.
Everything's gone. Carrick is burning.
Karak is being consumed by a firestorm. The scaffold has been destroyed. All orbital facilities destroyed. Significant debris ring in low Karak orbit.
A different alien fleet has arrived and lit the atmosphere on fire. Except for the mothership fleet and 600,000 cryogenically frozen colonists, the Kushan race has been wiped out. Finding the homeworld is now about the survival of your civilization. And yeah, having your starting area be doomed isn't new to games. What they don't have is Adagio for strings.
400,000 people secured.
Docking signal green.
Here it's all about execution. Homeworld is a journey. You have no clue what could be out there besides a vague promise from a rock. I'll talk about the story more later, since for now I want to focus on the visuals. Again, the remaster had a ton of effort in this.
I will say that just seeing this one scene where you come back and then you're like, shit. Everything that we knew and loved is gone. That music really hits. Longtime viewers of the channel will know that I love game OSTs, even though I'm not musically inclined, so I can't really speak much on them, but man, that hits. It slaps. Absolute fire.
All the art for the cinematic cutscenes were completely redone. There were some rough-looking parts in those, and they did a good job bringing everything up to line. I can't deny that the fidelity is way better in a lot of these scenes. The style has moved away from something that looks like a hand-drawn comic with the rough pencil lines, into something more clean and digital. I think the idea was to make the look more painting than pencil. Overall, I like it a lot, and it adds a greater sense of scale in some scenes that didn't quite have it before. At the same time, the quest for fidelity does change the mood of a few parts. Like when you first see Karen Sajet in the original, she's shrouded in darkness, facing off to the side. She looks strange and alien. They try to keep this aspect in the remaster, but now the scene's a lot more bright, she's directly facing the camera. The spirit is there, but the atmosphere is definitely different. And that's...
I feel like that runs in really any game that gets a remaster or like an updated HD version. Because like I know a lot of people dislike the newer visuals that we get in the HD remake for Persona 4 Golden. Or maybe it's rather just the PC port. Was it the PS Vita that it was originally released on? But yeah, from what I could tell, the visuals back then used to be a lot more moodier. There were things that were clearer to see and other things that are shrouded in mystery. Whereas with the higher fidelity remake of the PC port, a lot of that kind of gets washed out and becomes clearer. Personally, I thought it was still pretty moody, but I don't know. I didn't play the OG version. I know a lot of people argue back and forth like which one is better, but in my opinion, I think it's like the older game is still there if you have access to it, whereas the newer one also exists, so it really just depends on what you want to play. And hey, I mean, if you want the older visuals, there's probably a mod out there that's looking to restore that. Usually happens for a lot of the more popular video games anyways.
That sentence sounds like Zach Baggins reviewing A Trip to Space. It's a solid improvement overall and hard to pull off artistically. It's one thing to tell an artist to draw something. It's another to say, redraw this, but make it better, but it also has to be like this. What do you mean revisions are extra? Could you draw her giving birth? It's a rough life for artists out there. When it comes to the game itself, it looks great, and especially for an RTS. You can have a ton of ships fighting on screen, but the level of detail is great. In the original game, you couldn't free sweep the camera like this, you had to follow objects. Probably because a computer from back then might self-immolate trying to capture all this. You can still zoom in on whatever you want and get up into the face of even the smallest craft. You see how they cast light and shadows or when larger objects darken them? Weapons can have multiple levels of effects, and even the results of them can linger. You know, besides when the ships are actively on fire and dying. Even when repairs are completed, some scars from battle never heal. Unless you turn the option off. Which there are a lot of. There are like 9 different texture options. You can pick the smallest ship class to get battle scars. Again, excellent scalability if your PC isn't up to it. But man, there are some fine touches for a space strategy game. Back in the day, they sadly didn't have enough time to give each race its own special ship doctrine. In the campaign, you could actually choose the enemy's ship designs instead, because you'd be getting the same units, with the exception of 2. You can't do that anymore, and it's likely for the best. The Kushan ships are sleek, but angular and boxy. Most of their designs are super utilitarian. If something doesn't help the ship do its job, get rid of it. Even as research continues and larger and more powerful ships unlock, that doesn't go away. They're smooth, but not the height of efficiency. The exception is, appropriately, the mothership. It's very curvy and feminine. It looks like an ancient fertility statue or a silhouette of a pregnant woman. Please don't draw it giving birth, it already does.
Oh
Contrast
my
them
god. Oh jeez, you already know somebody already did that. It's the internet. The internet will do as the internet does. But the more utilitarian design makes sense considering the background of this particular race. But the wars going on and I'm going to assume lack of resources, you kinda had to make sure everything was going into the right places.
Mysterious Tidan Empire. These guys have been spacefaring for thousands of years. Their ships are more ornate and bizarre and sometimes almost insect-looking. What's extra cool is, despite the design differences, the ships still share similar silhouettes. The details are different, but you still know the ship's role just based on its general size and shape. You might think that readability could...
I think that's really important, the readability, as Mandal is probably about to say here, especially when there's so much going on screen. You need every single bit of help that you can get, knowing what is where and what it's doing.
Could be a huge problem in this kind of game, but it rarely is. Get far enough away and units will display shape icons. You may not have a mini-map, but you do have sensors mode. You can pop into this anytime and view the entire theater. Even as complexity increases, you're never too far out of control.
Group 7 reports enemy contact.
The upgraded space backgrounds also look fantastic. The early missions in the campaign start in the more dark areas of space, but as it goes on you start passing through these colorful nebulas. What's funny is the closer you get to where home might be, the more orange space becomes. Maybe it's supposed to remind you of the deserts of Carrick, or maybe it's a coincidence. Whatever the case, the visuals in Homeworld come together wonderfully. Then you add in the remastered soundscape and you have one hell of an atmosphere in an RTS game.
Let's hear it, please.
I got one. We're under fire. Under that trailer, I see him. You're looking fine. Acknowledged. Engaging targets of opportunity. Move order confirmed. This is looking good. Stay tight.
Holy shit. It's fucking cool. Okay, one of the complaints that I have for Dawn of War is the fact that every single time you click somebody, they've got something to say, regardless of what's going on or whether somebody else is narrating.
Excellent.
There are so many voice lines going, I don't even know what I can commentate.
Squads can now operate their
So far, it doesn't seem to be the case here, so props to them. And the dialogue is very fitting for what's currently going on as well, so I wonder exactly how they implement that. It probably has to do with the formation system.
9 reports enemy contact.
Group 9 copies. Locked on target. Group 7 reporting. Attack run initiated. Copy. We've got a situation here.
I know there are people who like to smugly point out there's no sound in space, usually only prompted by a movie or game having great sound work. We don't have to put up with it. Let's just kill them. Speaking of killing, that's really the...
Okay, look, man. If you don't want any sound, just turn off the sound, okay? There, extremely immersive gameplay. Well, I think there is certainly media out there that utilizes this, like, no sound in space to really good effect. With that aspect, creating, like, really good sound moments. I don't really know how else to explain it. Or, like, with no sound in space, it also opens up the opportunity for, like, your classic space opera to start like blaring in the background. Really emphasize that music, which is usually really, really good. And I think it kind of has to be good when your series is out in space. And you're going to be using that gimmick of having no sound, apart from that. But for more practical purposes, I think it's fine. Just let the laser beam shoot off into the distance and create really satisfying explosions.
The perfect way to describe Homeworld's sound design. The beam cracks, the engines whining, the artillery echoes, it's all amazing. You can also have way more effects at once over the original. At the same time, some aspects have a less is more approach. The actual story of the first Homeworld, the plot and the details, is very simple. When characters do show up, they're not there to add some personal drama. I'm not saying that would be bad to do because Ace Combat is sick. It's more that you're playing Karen, which by extension is the mothership, which by extension is an entire civilization. The character you're playing is that massive metal beehive, which means the stakes are too high for personal drama. When the intro goes,
She is now Fleet Command.
Yeah, goodbye human character. You are playing a hive mind abstract. Karen Sujet doesn't give a shit if James Callis is having another mental breakdown aboard a carrier, and neither should you. Yet, a lot of people still consider Homeworld to be a very emotional game. This is a story immeasurably elevated by its voice acting and its direction. The Fleet Intelligence is an organization, but you only hear the voice of a single person. He's just some stoic guy, his job is to give reports.
We advise commencing research immediately.
So how do they use him when everything he knows is gone?
The scaffold has been destroyed. All orbital facilities destroyed.
He never remarks on how clearly horrible it is. You just hear the devastation in his voice and his speaking pace. The music swells. Homeworld doesn't want to spell out emotion, it wants to evoke it. No
Exactly. That's what any great piece of media should seek to do. He's not saying how sad he is. You feel how sad he is, despite him continuing to do his job. And it's these feelings that you feel when playing the game that you're going to remember long into the future. Not the exact lines that are said, although there are certainly likely some iconic lines here. But the reason why they're so memorable is because of the emotion that it evoked within you, the player. That's really the hallmark of good voice acting. When they can carry that emotion, even through like a language barrier. Like, I don't understand Japanese, but I know good Japanese voice acting when I hear it.
Oh shit, this is sad.
I took care of you, saved you from your miserable life.
Even in the abstract sensors menu where you don't directly see the combat, you still hear the comm chatter. They announce what they're doing, but sometimes you hear them celebrate victories, they get nervous or scared. The human element isn't gone. Even as Fleet Command coldly announces a ship loss due to the way the game is structured, it resonates a little more than just using an RTS unit. The other characters you encounter are ships, which usually represent an entire people, so the voice acting has to carry a lot more. The line says what event happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but the tone says how the race felt about it. Your mortal enemy is the Titan, but you never talk to them, you just learn about them. The one message you get from them is brief and very direct. So with how Homeworld has introduced everybody else, this keeps them vague and threatening right up until the end. It's impressive. They made a memorable, captivating sci-fi story for a game, and they did it without getting too lore or jargon heavy. There are great games that do explore those ideas, but with some rewrites you could probably move Homeworld's story into another setting. Strip it all away and the spaceship game has a very human story. For the remaster, they brought the original voice actors back to re-record their lines with better technology and fidelity. They didn't change the writing at all, the lines are exactly the same. Fans argue about which line delivery is better. A Homeworld 1 dork lore argument is about emotional tone. It's like the opposite of a Starsworth thread, at least until someone brings up Homeworld 2. And the music's cool.
Show no mercy. Moving to intercept.
Yeah.
Watch for debris.
Group 9 reports enemy contact.
Roger, Group 6. Watch your 6.
I've got to get to the gameplay or else I could talk about this kind of stuff forever.
Hey, I could do so as well. But that music kind of evokes the image of like a vast desert, which makes a whole lot of sense for these people who came from a desert world.
I always wondered if the composer for the 2003 Battlestar Galactica was a fan of the game. I mean, hell, the game is inspired by the 70s show. Clearly there were people working on it who were down with the video games.
They must not learn of our contact. We must depart. All that moves is easily heard in the void. We will listen for you. Farewell.
All this has happened before, and will happen again.
As for the actual gameplay, it's easy to learn but hard to master. You move units just like you would in most RTS games, but you can also hold a button down to change the elevation. This gives you a lot of maneuvering options, and the game throws in some unique challenges with it. In one mission, you have asteroids approaching the mothership from multiple layers, which you need to hold off with the proper alignment of ships. Or another where you need to carefully maneuver your ships through dust clouds. Otherwise, they start cooking in the system's intense radiation. Besides examples like that, 3D space directly impacts combat based on where damage is dealt. Ships in this setting rely on armor, and sometimes it's weaker from a certain direction. Because you could take on a capital ship like a carrier in a head-on slap fight, but their armor is weaker at the top, so maneuvering your fleet above them will crunch through them much faster. Again, you can factor in the formations and tactics from earlier into this, but none of it is hard to pull off. Ships might...
That's cool. Obviously, it takes a little bit of experience and learning, but it's one of those games that is probably exciting to explore, with a ton of potential skill expression. Because, like, when it comes to your traditional RTS games, that isn't really a factor, is it? You just kind of get, like, the best unit to attack said other unit, and depending on the rock, paper, scissors match there, that's the thing that decides whichever unit will win. Or, you know, just bigger number equals better. Homeworld seems to add an extra layer of strategy to it, which is good to see that, you know, it's not just a gimmick, that it's an RTS in a 3D space, but they're actually utilizing it for something.
Might have a single unique ability. You can click drag for guard orders or repair operations or an attack, and it's all kept simple. The biggest barrier to entry really is just the way of thinking, since there are still precious few strategy games like this. Enemies approaching from far below your forces or other strange angles is something you have to get used to. Homeworld has enough quality of life features to stop that from being overwhelming. Once you do get used to the basics, you can appreciate how the game is balanced out. Using big doom ships like cruisers are fun, but they're not a death stack solution. They can be vulnerable to smaller craft like bombers, so there are fighters and interceptors to counteract them. You could counter these with other strike craft or move up to using corvettes. They're still a little too nimble to be reliably hit by the larger weapons. But these are vulnerable to other corvettes, or frigates, but frigates are vulnerable to the big capital ship guns again. But there are anti-capital frigates. Hell, there are anti-strike craft frigates. You can create all kinds of fleet compositions that can work, but figuring out how they work, and especially how they synchronize with other units, is the key. Because if you just look at one, a carrier is a big scary ship. It has a few different weapons on it, it can build other ships instead of just holding them, and it can also be yoinked away by some of the smallest craft in the game. There are limits on how much of a thing you can build, and there's no one-unit solution. It's a blast putting a fleet together and then breaking it up into battle groups, attacking an enemy from multiple angles, and the interface is good enough that you don't have to master a ton of hotkeys or be a micromanaging god to have a good time with it. It's in that Age of Empires ideal zone of fun. You could pick the game up and take things slowly.
Age of Empires is another RTS that I've heard a lot of people recommend, considering that it's like one of the classics. That's also another quality that I've heard a lot of good RTS games have, is the fact that they tried to reduce the amount of micromanagement you have to do, to reduce the APM. Because if your game requires a very high APM, then it kind of just has a very high barrier to entry. And with RTS games being a genre that doesn't have many people playing and it's not very mainstream, it's kind of important to have that lower barrier to entry. From the outside here, the game does look incredibly daunting, but from what Mandalore is saying here, it's probably going to be another one of those situations like what I had with Total War, where I was just extremely overwhelmed at first, but then once you understand it, you just get it, you know?
And be just fine. But if you want to light up your keyboard and get sweaty, multiplayer will show you how high that ceiling can get. It might not be quite on AoE 2's level though. Back when it was still stuck on Game Ranger, I played with a guy who could reliably predict when he'd hit Castle Age within about 10 seconds based on where the deer were on the map. I haven't felt that kind of fear playing this.
What the
now,
heck?
Compared to the original.
What? Okay, I have no clue how to play Age of Empires, but what I'm assuming is that the people who have been playing it have probably played it in such a way that they've streamlined the most efficient process to advance their own faction, to the point where they can predict it down to the second. I can kind of understand that, because back when I was playing League of Legends, and I was pretty addicted to it, I was playing a lot of ranked, and I could remember all the timers and stuff. Or like when somebody used Flash, I could remember exactly when they used it and when they have it again. It's not that difficult if you're extremely absorbed with the game.
There are some key gameplay differences. How building works isn't quite the same, there are some balance changes, and some quality of life features like being able to group salvage just aren't here. I do want to go over the two that I think are the most important. The biggest universal change is fuel. In the original, smaller craft like fighters and bombers occasionally have to come back to support ships to resupply, so there is an extra element in fighting strike craft in that you could blow up their support ships. In the remaster, there is no fuel, but even in levels like the Garden of Kadesh, you'll still see carriers drop off fuel pods. The AI still uses a hidden fuel mechanic for this level, but the player never has to, so that entire mechanic has been lost. And you know what? Good. Fuck fuel. I like.
Hey, making the game less complex is probably a good thing. As Mandalore said, it opened up a different way to fight, but also, like, I don't think it's the highlight here. It's also a really difficult thing for game developers to kind of have to figure out about their series, because if your game lacks complexity and it's just so incredibly shallow, then there isn't really a whole lot for a player to explore or express their skill. But when it becomes too complex to the point where it's just not fun anymore, then nobody's gonna want to stick with your game. I think fueling systems in general just ain't it. Although it has to be more nuanced, because a lot of the time it can be a core mechanic and can make the game more fun, but it depends on the game and the presentation. For this one, I'd say no. I'd rather have more fun controlling my units, figuring out the best strategies and fighting it out, or figuring all that out and then getting screwed over because I forgot to refuel.
Like the idea of it. It can work great on larger maps or with an overhaul, like if a smaller ship gets too far away from support craft for too long. I'd like the extra depth that space supply lines could add, but how Homeworld 1 did it was mainly tedious. You still have to build your smallest ships individually. Again, it wouldn't be until Homeworld 2 where you can make a squadron at once. Fuel could have worked better there, but it was already removed in that game. The consequence of this is some support ships aren't as useful anymore, but they're multi-role, so never gone completely. Docking craft to them still heals them. An overhaul could work, but it was very flawed in the original. And at this rate, I know tedium. And fuel tedium.
Yeah, somebody who's played through Pathologic and Pathologic 2, I'm sure Mandalore is the best at tedium. That game was literally designed to be as tedious as possible.
Turned on Aurora this year. The second big change is a campaign one. Dynamic difficulty scaling. Again, this is another Homeworld 2 thing. Basically, the size of your fleet and how rich you are determine how many enemies you fight in the next map. It's a good way to try and keep things challenging, but a lot of people don't like it. When a mission ends, all you have, including your ships, carry over. It's a great example of how the story and gameplay are so intertwined in Homeworld. You're moving an entire civilization around. Every ship loss and resource counts. When a mission ends, you can still linger around, collect resources, and build your fleet up. You go when you choose to. And the remaster did import a great Homeworld.
Okay, well, before we continue, about dynamic difficulty, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of that, because then, like, how else am I supposed to feel stronger if every single enemy is kind of balanced around the same difficulty regardless of how much I progress? But maybe I just haven't played enough games to form a better opinion on that. For the most part, though, whenever I go back to a video game, actually, let's just make a direct example here. Like, when I'm playing Space Marine 2, I felt a sense of accomplishment beating the game on lethal difficulty. We did that with all the operations, and it just felt nice because I recall the days when I struggled to simply beat a substantial difficulty operation. And now whenever you go back to playing those like substantial difficulty operations, they just feel incredibly easy and such a breeze because you've learned better tactics and maybe you have better gear and you have more perks and whatnot. It's just that sense of progression that you have, and that wouldn't exist if the difficulty was dynamic. But once again, maybe this is more nuanced. Maybe it depends on the execution and the type of video game that you're playing. Just like with the fueling mechanic that we spoke about earlier.
2 feature that auto-collects every resource on the map, so you don't have to do that manually. Still, players like to pull off maneuvers like hijacking a bunch of the enemy's ships so their fleet would be huge. You also get a lot more visual variety, and your forces look even more ragtag. In this system, it means the battles will always be bigger, and a lot of people don't like that. Funnily enough, I think this works better here than the second game, but it's still a fair point to make. Well, if you use the player patch, you can scale this back down or make the game even harder. If you don't want constant harsh battles, you can flip it off, and if you do, you can go nuts. With the way resource amounts and a few other things are updated.
Okay, well, at least there's that there's the customizability to your experience, and there seems to be a whole lot of options there. Kind of reminds me of when I took a look at the settings you could change in Mechanicus. I would say that the more you can customize your experience, the better. In really any video game, but definitely strategy video games.
It's really the lack of options in the scaling that hurts the vanilla game. With the mod, there's nothing to worry about. If you never played the 99 game, I'd say don't worry that you're missing out on the original authentic experience or something like that. It still has a few annoying things missing here and there, but it is vastly better to actually play than the original. The best part is the collection still has that game in there. They're not trying to bury it away. Now I'm going to get into what I like about the story.
Wait, what was that? Was that Warcraft?
But not too much. As I said before, it's a pretty simple tale. Now when I said the story could be adapted to any setting, I didn't mean to imply that there's no lore. Homeworld has a lot of lore. The game came with a 115-page manual, which the remaster doesn't have, but you can find a PDF easily enough.
Well, there you go. It came out during the era of video game manuals, which from what you guys have said during our Arcanum reaction, that it was actually really exciting to open up and read. And considering the amount of time and effort that a lot of developers put into their manuals, I would agree. It's like the game comes with a free book, just telling you about the whole lore of the series.
You can read about the history of the Kushan and how the mothership was made, how all the technology works, the different cultures and clans on Carrick. It's a deep manual.
Heck yeah.
Just being near it grants you a timeshare inside of a high school locker. It's fun to know, but you don't need to know. Besides the tragedy, the start of the game opens a good mystery. Carrick was burned down by the Taidan Empire because they violated a 4,000-year-old treaty not to develop hyperspace technology. There's an established galactic civilization and order to things, but you have no idea about any of it. Your people have no choice but to go home, and this is causing huge repercussions. Where a lot of strategy games have you building an empire, here you're just a token on the board. Some religions think the Kushan returning is a prophecy or holy. Factions who don't like the Taidan are using the burning of Carrick to further their own agenda. You feel like you're inside of a giant political game, but barely a player. I mean, what's an equivalent for this? Okay. Think about the isolated tribe on Sentinel Island, and then one day the UN sees them playing around in a nearby territory, wearing power armor. Somehow, they're also experimenting with a nuclear weapon. The UN is flipping shit, and then someone nukes the island. But all the people and weapons they were afraid of weren't there and survived, and are now laying claim to a small part of Madagascar. Do you think that might shake up politics and cause a bunch of other situations to explode? That's the story of Homeworld.
Okay. What? It was such a strange analogy, but I completely understand it. Yeah, that would fuck up everybody's day. Like, where did these guys come from?
Global shakeup going on, but you're only seeing it through a small, kind of mystical point of view. As the story goes on, the fleet grows, and you learn more. Your only message from the Taidan is right before you challenge them directly, and they're still a huge threat. It's a well-paced campaign, with satisfying reveals about the Kushan and their Hagaran homeworld. and those who they encounter and even fight have some more dimensions to them. You know, except for the rocks. At its core, it's a story about going home. You may have guessed they make it there.
In
Homeworld
2?
2 has a different story approach. We start off with a bit of a retcon. Thousands of years ago, a progenitor hyperspace core was discovered, which all space travel is based on. Then, thousands of years later, the Kushan find the second core in the wreckage on their planet. So the mothership isn't just reverse engineered, it's powered by an ancient, unfathomable technology. It does explain how the mothership is so absurdly powerful and how they managed to get home at all, but there's more to this. It's over 100 years later, and Karen is still alive and appears to be the same age. Homeworld Cataclysm took place between the games, but I believe it's been deemed to be non-canon. If you're directly connected to your ship like she was, you're called an Unbound, and for some reason live a very long time. I think that's still the explanation, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, this story's a little less Exodus and a little more Revelations.
This is the story of the end time. We know this.
No, not the end times, no!
Because the third core has been found. Under the dark influence of this core, the Taidan have risen under a new leader, a Vagar warrior lord named Makan.
Makan.
He calls himself the Seljuk-Kar, the Chosen One.
I don't know about this setting throwing the Chosen One out there. The intro heralds a big difference in the tone of these stories. In Homeworld 1, religious and mystic elements could definitely be felt, but they were also ambiguous. You could view it as pure human struggle or an act of destiny. It's a large unknown universe and anything is possible.
Your progress is becoming known among the inner rim worlds and elsewhere. Many cultures have prophesized your return.
It's possible, but fate is never proven. Now we have tangible ancient ones and prophecy, and it's central to the story. I wonder how this will go.
You're what? The servant of your master? You seem to be a creature from hell.
So a new mothership is being commissioned, again commanded by Karen Sajet, and once again we're testing it. Except the first was made for a journey into unknown space, and this one is being made during an active galactic war. The ship being near undefended is strange, and it's no wonder the Vagar show up to attack it. The mothership does escape and gets resupplied with a proper crew, but now the homeworld is under siege. Makan demands the second core, or else he'll destroy Higara. The fleet must now travel through the galaxy to find an ancient relic that will stop the prophecy and end Makan's reign of terror. He simply can't be the Seljuk-Kar because that will mean the return of Seljuk. What does that mean? You'll have to find out. If the game sounds reliant on the lore from the first Homeworld's manual, well, there are elements of it here, but no, not really. The Homeworld 2 manual does have backstory, and it's a single page of it. This still gives more context to what's happening, but the whole prophecy thing is still kept vague. Compared to a journey, Homeworld 2 is more of a war story, one that's floating around an unknown doom prophecy at the center. There's more to unpack here, but first I want to talk about what's different. I'll start with the visuals again. I don't need to retread the technical graphics stuff.
Okay, wait. Before we continue, I don't know, I have mixed feelings on a lot of the new developments that we've added into Homeworld 2. Even bigger eyebrow raised at the fact that there's like a single page of lore. What exactly was going on here? Why do I feel so off about this? I mean, like inherently, it's not bad to introduce these kind of things, but I kind of feel like we're straying away from Homeworld. I don't know how I'm feeling this. I didn't even play the original game. Just wanted to put my thoughts out there where I'm currently at. I could be wrong. Probably am.
Because yeah, the game looks good. They definitely had more to draw from directly with the sequel. It was a lot more graphically complex than its predecessor, so you have more to touch up. The new backgrounds are especially great. There can be deep shades of red and just harsher tones in general. Even if the writing doesn't carry it, the game sure looks apocalyptic.
Very nice,
the sheer size these battles get to, conveyed with these backdrops, convey everything I need to know. Most of the ship designs have changed a lot too, as you would expect after 100 years. Higaran ships are way less boxy and way more angular. These are more space planes and space boats than they were previously. A lot of the ships have large turrets on them, even on something as relatively small as a Corvette. I think this design works on larger ships like frigates and destroyers. There are some ships I love the look of, like the battlecruiser, but the turrets are more spaced out on those. The little ones can look like space tanks. The Higaran ships look more sleek and dangerous now, even a mine layer has a turret on it. Safe to say the industrial look is now more space opera. It reminds me of the Dead Space 1 and 2 arguments. Some people enjoy the new looks, others think it was twisted too far. I think I'm in the same spot I was in that debate too. It likely wouldn't make sense for the ships to keep looking as Tonka Truck as they were, but I definitely favor some of the first ships. Besides, the Vagar and Taidan Remnant do carry on that spirit. The Vega are nomads, and their ships are extremely specialized even more so than the Kushans were. It's not like the studio had forgotten the original design ideas, it's just a role reversal. My feelings haven't changed much here, I still love the look of the game. When it comes to audio, the fantastic new soundscape is here too. The biggest change is how more bombastic the music can be, and I'm completely here for it.
Enemy contact.
Under fire, requesting orders. Engaging. Group 7 copies. Attack run initiated. Copy. Attack coordinates locked in. Let's stay calm.
Battlecruiser under attack. Group 1 reports victory.
Standing by. Pursuing targets. Strike group reports hostile contact. Strike group under enemy attack.
Man, just the soundscape feels so satisfying.
Copy.
Flak frigate complete.
Taking damage. Group 7 reporting. Standing by.
The mothership is taking light enemy fire.
Roger. Destination locked in.
There's no adagio for strings moment, but they do use the music effectively for the cutscenes. Nothing I'll spoil here though. When it comes to the gameplay, the core hasn't changed. In the remaster's case, how you interact with and control the game is identical. However, with a new fleet composition comes a game that can feel very different. For better and worse, there's been some streamlining. As mentioned before, Strikecraft are now built in a full squad, which does make sense. The small fry were never ships you'd send in alone, so why bother building or maintaining individuals when they can just come out as a squad? If a squadron loses ships, you dock it back up and it replenishes. It's a welcome addition that I do think removed a lot of needless micromanagement. It's faster and simpler to build and control what you want in a fight. But more than that got compressed in. Where Homeworld 1 had resource collectors, repair corvettes, and salvage corvettes, Homeworld 2 has the resource collector, which now fills out all those previous roles. Except you can no longer whisk enemy ships away to the dungeon. There's now a dedicated marine boarding frigate, which is much more vulnerable, and I really don't use it much outside of campaign. You watch a bar fill, and the ship is yours, and man, I'm not a fan of it. It's not nearly as funny, or gremlin-like, compared to physically seeing...
Because like, with the Homeworld 1 mechanic there, it feels like you could pull off some pretty degenerate strategies of just stealing your opponent's ships. It's that gremlin attitude, the glee that you get from just pulling off some of this stupid shit that's not here anymore. I can see the basis of the idea of streamlining the process, but like, it kind of ended up removing something that people likely found to be really fun to do.
Carrier privileges being revoked. It's not the same kind of joy. The role combining goes across a few classes to reduce redundancy. Where the Kushan had 5 kinds of fighters, the Higarans only have 3. They do try to make up for this. Where Homeworld's research was mainly about unlocking new ship types, Homeworld 2 has actual ship upgrades. They can give better stats or new abilities, but they don't go too in-depth. To build certain craft, larger ships like the mothership and carriers now have to build facilities for them. That means when you do make a carrier, you have to decide what its role will be and what it can build. You can upgrade other subsystems too, like better sensors. And best of all, the subsystems are now physically on the ships. These can be more vulnerable to different weapons, so capital fights are more tactical. Instead of spending a long time to completely break an enemy carrier, some bombers can swoop in and take out its ability to make new fighters. This adds a lot of options for good micromanagement. You still have the directional armor from before, but this adds a whole new layer to it. The story is not as engaging this time around, but the gameplay is. There's more mission variety and objectives that feel different to play. They're the kind of improvements that come after making something groundbreaking. They're not struggling as hard just trying to make the basic idea work anymore, they got that. Now it's how can we make things more interesting to play. They do pull this off for the most part, but now we have to go back to dynamic difficulty. Outside of taking some spaceship options away, this is my biggest gameplay issue. Well, actually, it's a few compounding things. See, before you chose when to leave a mission, and now, when the mission is done, so are you. Every resource is auto-collected, and your fleet goes to the next mission as is. Here's how this gets messy. This is an active war, so you can no longer pace it like it's the Oregon Trail. You still carry ships and tech over and everything else like before, but you no longer feel the impact, especially of their losses. Except in the worst of times. Each map has absurdly more resources. The fights are much larger, and the time to kill for smaller ships much quicker. You'll be building ships more than ever before, and they feel replaceable. As the fights get more massive, you get closer and closer to a danger tipping point.
Okay, I think having the ships feel replaceable is kind of a bad move, because that was a pretty big aspect, I would say, in the first game, right? Where there were actual human pilots in those, and they were talking, communicating with each other on different orders that you gave them. It felt like a group of people who didn't have a home anymore and were trying their best to survive. By doing this, though, it kind of removes that aspect, and so the deaths of all of your units doesn't feel very impactful. We'll just spawn some more. So now we're just going back into the usual RTS stuff, without what made the first one special. At least in my opinion. That's kind of what this feels like. Maybe that's what I felt was kind of wrong, but eh.
Enemy numbers might increase until you're fighting a death stack of battle cruisers. I already went over the scaling, but here's the difference. You can win a satisfying, hard-fought battle, but you can also win it the wrong way. The way where the next mission throws you into the lion's den with barely a fleet to your name. Without the downtime, you can no longer strategize and build your fleet back up. You can be thrown into a new mission where you imminently need a bunch of ships that you no longer have. These missions could have multiple staged objectives, so you don't know what might automatically make you move forward, unless you've already played the game or got screwed over and had to go back a bit. This can mean trying to set the map up to have a downtime period because the battles get so intense, instead of just actually having a downtime period. It might not sound like much, but once you've played it, not deciding when you can leave is a huge loss of control. I mean, that could be the point of it, but everything no longer gels together like it once did. In that light, I'm now going to briefly go over the story, and if you don't want spoilers, go to here.
Hey, that's what we're here for.
I think I feel bad for anyone who skipped ahead and came back here. It's as stylish as ever, but playing it again now, man, this reminds me of the Rise of Skywalker in the worst way possible. We are getting way too Star Wars. To stop the prophecy, the Higarans must find a progenitor ship graveyard. They need to find the wreck of a ship, which has a ship in the back of it because the little ship can lead them to the Balcora Gate, which will then lead to Sejuk. It is a cool ship, and your longtime bros the Bentuzi helped you find it.
So Sejuk is a place, not a person.
Alongside giving you the first hyperspace core, which they owned. You get to Halo, but Makan is already there, and he has his own ancient dreadnought progenitor ship. These dreadnoughts were known as the gatekeepers of Sejuk, and I guess it doesn't matter how Makan got one. Anyhow, on the other side of the gate is a huge warship. This is Sejuk, another big ship. You defeat Makan, you loot his pants and his hyperspace core, and all three cores have slots instead of Sejuk that they go into. The entire mothership crew transfers over, and the whole ship jumps back to Higara. The battle there has remained intense, but the Vagar have brought their Man of Steel atmosphere killers. These launch missiles that will kill the entire population, and the missile launchers are immune to every weapon ever conceived, except for the Jesus ship. So the big payoff is scattering your fleet around to shoot down missiles before they kill the entire population. Meanwhile, the Primordial Enterprise slow boats to each launcher to take it down. This scenario really doesn't let you feel the true power of Sejuk, and getting here was a string of we have to find a thing, to find a thing, to find a thing. With final victory comes a final reveal. Sejuk opens a new galactic network of hyperspace gates. This will significantly reduce galactic commute times and increase trade and prosperity. Thus ushers in the age of Sajet. It wasn't Makan, but her who was the chosen one, the Sajutkar. The galaxy has changed forever, and I feel nothing. It's not horrible, and the nature of the first game's story does make it hard to follow up on since there is a kind of finality to it. This could have just been a political war story, or if they were going to go full mysticism, at least explore the elements more. Instead, we get a messy blend of things. It's never really stuck with me.
I mean, I can see why. When you boil it down to its core, it's pretty simple. Doesn't feel very impactful. Not on the human level that the story of the first game had. It just doesn't really feel like the ships are characters anymore. They're just things that you go to collect to then destroy the other thing that's about to destroy you to then win. That's kind of a shame. This is, I don't know. Maybe it's just the way Mandalore presented it, but I mean, I kind of already made my point on how it was like, it didn't feel very impactful whenever you lost ships anymore in the second game.
Strike group
Third impact confirmed.
Homeworld 2 genuinely has some great features and ideas, but with how some things were cut down and how the campaign was written, it's no surprise it doesn't resonate like the original. Luckily, the game's skirmish mode lets you play in any faction from across both games. There are plenty of hours to be spent here, and the player's patch adds even more options like letting you control 2 fleets. This game is very worth picking up, and especially now. After talking with GOG, I have an affiliate deal unlike any I've had before. Using the pinned link, you can pick up the entire Remastered collection for 95% off. I was going to say it's well worth the $30, this is less than 2. It's a fantastic strategy series and a visually faithful remaster. I desperately wish Cataclysm got the same treatment, but as of the time of this video, the source code is still missing for that one. There is Homeworld 3 to keep an eye on, and next year I want to talk about how the series handled ground combat. So I've got that to keep me going. Have a wonderful Christmas or any other holidays you'll be celebrating. I'll see you next time. Best Christmas present given or received. Well, when I was a kid, I got this badly wrapped, like, box. It was like a shoebox, indented in and, like, kind of wet. It looked awful, but he was pranking me and a brand new copy of Tiberian Sun was inside. I got maybe a game or two a year back then, so I wasn't expecting that at all. No matter what I've gotten since, I always look back on that. What is my least favorite Pokemon? The only mainline game I owned and played was Pokemon Gold. I hated Zubats, and later I would discover Cliff Racers. Am I technically...
The only Pokemon game I ever played was Emerald. I don't remember a single Pokemon from that game, though. It's been way too long.
Am I technically a VTuber? I hope not. Could a 40k Total War be...
Oh, come on now, Mandalore. Join us. I do find it weird, though, how there's this, like, stigma around VTubers of like, oh, you're using a VTuber model for so-and-so reason, probably. But it's really not that deep. I'm sure there are people out there who use it for those reasons, but most people are normal. I could say that we started using VTuber models because, like, we enjoyed watching VTubers, so it was like, it was a natural transition. Like, hey, that's cool. I kind of want to use that. Otherwise, it doesn't really change what we do and how we act. I'd still be making the same videos if I was using a face cam.
Be done. Should it? I don't know if it should, but give it a few years. It's inevitable. Did I have a teacher I could never get along with? I did, and it was in first grade. As a kid, I was left-handed, but she would take points off my paper and other coercion methods if she saw me using my left hand instead of my right to write or do homework or anything.
The fuck?
So now I'm right-handed, and my handwriting is still horrible. I found out later that I happened to look like how her son did at the same age, and they had had like a huge falling out or something, and they hated each other. So she got her revenge on a left-handed 6-year-old.
What the
fuck? It sucked back then, but it's funny to look back on. Alright, stay safe out there. Oh right, don't forget to play the Tyrannic Raiders bonus mission. This being missing was a big deal. We desperately need more games like this.
Man, there can be some pretty messed up teachers out there. Run into a few nasty ones myself. Honestly though, Homeworld seems really interesting. I like a lot of the ideas implemented, and I feel like the story for the first game was very compelling. Kind of missed that the second game didn't follow up with a banger of a sequel, but I guess it is what it is. For people who enjoy gameplay more, maybe Homeworld 2 was a banger. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me, my dudes. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.